Politicians in Greece push an austerity deal forward, but there's a lot of skepticism among European leaders about whether Athens will follow through. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. I'm going to be speaking with one of our correspondents about the latest events in Europe shortly. But first, a look at today's business headlines. President Obama's federal budget, released later today, asks for investments in manufacturing, transportation, and new education initiatives. But with hard caps in place on discretionary spending, everyone will be looking to see which agencies or departments will see cuts. Riots in Greece after the government approved austerity measures that will cut tens of thousands of state jobs. Apple announced it will ask a labor rights organization to conduct audits of its suppliers' factories. The company has been criticized for partnering with Chinese manufacturers that have poor working conditions. When the Greek parliament approved austerity measures earlier today, European leaders were quick to offer their support. But extensive delays and missed deadlines have undermined confidence that Athens is willing to follow through on its commitment. Joining me today is Mark Scott. Thanks for joining me, Mark.
Good to be here.
So help us understand this grinding European debt crisis. It seems like it's hard to keep track of where we are. Now that Greece has agreed to do these painful cuts, cuts in pensions, cuts in salaries, cuts in jobs themselves, is the hard-fought battle over? What's next?
I would say that the battle's over, but the war still goes on. There's a lot of relief, I would say, that this deal has finally been finished, but now I think people will turn to a deal that is expected to be announced on Wednesday with Greece's creditors about getting a deal done.
Okay, so we need the creditors to buy into what the politicians have agreed to, right? This is some kind of a reduction in Greece's overall debt?
Well, no, exactly. The idea is they're asking for creditors to take a haircut on what's outstanding on the debt. Yet it's a question, there's been a lot of discussion over months about getting this done. Will it happen this week? It looks like it might, but we'll still have to see. Okay,
so the importance here is that they really have to make these kind of cuts in the debt because Greece is not growing fast enough and its revenues are actually falling, right? So its position is getting worse and worse in terms of debt.
Yes.
And there's a deadline coming. Tell me about that.
Well, exactly. They have, the idea is for European countries and the IMF to provide more money, another bailout, a tranche of the bailout in March. Will that happen? Yeah, likely so, but there's still a lot of discussion about will Greece be able to pull it off.
And investors, as soon as we get this deal, there'll be a sigh of relief once again probably in the markets and around the world and certainly within Europe. But where will investors focus their attention then?
Well, what we've seen over the last 12, 18 months is that one deal is done and then investors turn somewhere else. If the Greek deal is done, they probably will look to other southern European countries like Spain and Portugal.
And tell me, how is Portugal faring amid all this mess? Is it like Greece?
To a degree, yes. I mean, they've had more or less a decade of non-growth, and therefore their deficit is rising. And it's a question, really, do they have the competitiveness in the domestic economy to really pull themselves out?
And they've pretty much done like Greece, right? They've taken austerity measures, they've made painful cuts, and yet their picture doesn't seem to be improving?
Well, exactly. I mean, you look at across the Eurozone, it's expected to fall into recession this year, and particularly in the southern European countries, there is a lack of competitiveness in the domestic labor market for them to really compete on a global scale.
So if we pull back to Greece for a moment and say, okay, this deal goes through, and European countries certainly think they've ring-fenced off Greece so that the problems won't spread, it won't be a contagion infecting the rest of Europe. But can Greece really manage this in the long term? Isn't there increasing concern that it really will have to default or maybe leave the Eurozone?
Well, there's a slight divide between politicians in Brussels who would say, no, Greece we're going to be behind Greece and Greece will stay. If you look at what's going on today, for example, with the protests, there has to be some questions being raised about what is the best long-term play for Greece, and that might be potentially defaulting or, in the worst case scenario, leaving the euro.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Mark. We'll be watching it closely. With all of the excitement surrounding renewable energy, you would think a high-performance electric car would be an easy sell. But as Lawrence Ulrich reports, the road to market for a maker of hybrid cars can be pretty bumpy.
This devilish grin you're looking at belongs to the Fisker Karma. This is a plug-in hybrid from Fisker Motors, built in Finland by a California startup. and they're looking to take on the big guns in the industry with their idea of sustainable luxury.
This is Lawrence Ulrich reporting for the New York Times. 2 years ago, I caught up with the Karma and Fisker's chief executive, Henrik Fisker, at the New York Auto Show.
The reason I believe that we can go up against the big car companies is because we are looking at developing a car from a complete new point of view.
Now the Karma is finally headed to dealerships and celebrity driveways, but it's been a bumpy road to market for this $100,000 ride.
Let's check out the thrust.
The Karma can travel up to 50 miles on a full battery charge with no tailpipe emissions. But then a small turbocharged four-cylinder engine built by General Motors cranks up to generate electricity, letting you cover another 250 miles. Fisker is betting that the Karma's blend of exotic looks, performance, and green technology will sustain the company until it can deliver a more affordable American-built model. But like other automakers that received government loans to develop cleaner cars, Fisker is under the microscope.
It's not the car, it's the time it took to get the car to market.
The Karma made its debut after 2 years of production delays. Fisker already recalled more than 200 cars that had trouble with hose clamps that could potentially lead to a battery fire. Fisker has also taken heat for assembling the Karma in Finland after it received a $500 million loan from the Energy Department. The company says the money went only toward American jobs to develop the Karma, and the rest toward a more affordable sedan to be built in Delaware. Still, the layoff last week of more than 60 Fisker workers has fueled more complaints. In this election year, conservatives especially have seized on green cars as a wedge issue, a referendum on President Obama's stimulus spending and energy policies.
This has nothing to do with the Chevy Volt or the Nissan Leaf or anything else. For me, it comes down to taxpayer dollars being used to subsidize a product that this administration has decided should go forward.
The Chevy Volt has drawn heavy scrutiny as a result of a battery fire that occurred after crash tests. But no fires have resulted from real-world crashes, and GM has beefed up protection for the car's battery.
Although we loaded the Volt with state-of-the-art safety features, we did not engineer the Volt to be a political punching bag.
Of course, Fisker is hardly alone in receiving federal help. Programs to encourage energy efficiency and advanced technology have been around for decades. The government has lent billions in recent years to other plug-in makers, including Nissan, Ford, General Motors, and Tesla. In addition to political pushback, hybrids and electric cars face stiff competition from increasingly efficient conventional gasoline and even clean diesel engines. And when gas prices hold steady, Americans have shown little inclination to spend big bucks on hybrid and electric technology.
We found out that not only does gasoline have to be high to make people think about hybrids and electric vehicles, it has to continue to accelerate. And that's not going to occur in our forecast.
Morgan Stanley recently downgraded its forecast for electric and hybrid vehicles to a predicted market share of just 4.5% globally by 2025. Even if the plug-in audience is small, Fisker is still dreaming big as its signature car plugs in and hits the American road.
That's all for today. Please remember to join us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of Obama's budget and more. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.